but just, devout, self-controlled, holding fast to the faithful word, which is in accordance with the teaching, of able both to exhort in sound doctrine and to refute those who can contradict.
Great, thank you. John, can you continue?
In order to be a good steward of God's story, one must, among other things, give oneself to careful and systematic study, both before and after ordination. This will occur not because he or she is forced to do so, but out of love for God and his people, the world that he is working to redeem, and out of an inescapable sense of responsibility. It cannot be too strongly emphasized that the attitude one brings to preparation for the ministry reveals much about what he or she thinks of God, the gospel, and Christ's church. The God who became incarnate in Jesus and who made a way of salvation for all gave his very best in the life, death, and resurrection of his Son. In order to be a good steward, a Christian minister must respond in kind. Jesus told numerous parables about stewards who did not recognize the importance of what had been entrusted to them.
Preparation, one's education in all its dimensions for ministry in Christ's church should be pursued in full light of the responsibility before God and his people that the ministry involves. This requires that one take advantage of the best educational resources at her or his disposal. And I have that one underlined particularly. Taking advantage of the best educational resources at our disposal. Incidentally, I hit the record button and it's reminding me that I need to do that record button. Asked me to do that, the district did, to have these recorded so that that it could become a resource. So just wanted you, Diane, if you'll go to that next paragraph and we'll wrap it up here with 2 more paragraphs.
Did you say the last paragraph?
I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm on now. Which paragraph did you say? I'm sorry.
It begins, the Church of the Nazarene recognizes.
Okay. The Church of the Nazarene recognizes how large is the responsibility associated with the ordained Christian ministry and accepts it fully. Part of the way we recognize our responsibility before God is seen in the requirements we make for ordination and the practice of ministry. We believe that the call to and practice of Christian ministry is a gift, not a right or privilege. We believe that God holds a minister to the highest of religious, moral, personal, and professional standards. We are not reluctant to expect that those standards be observed from the time of one's call until his or her death. We believe that Christian ministry should first be a form of worship. The practice of ministry is both an offering to God and a service to his church. By the miracle of grace, the work of the ministry can become a means of grace for God's people. One's education for ministry is also a form of worship.
And I've got that one underlined as well. I think that's a beautiful and profound statement, and one to enjoy, to give you the permission to really see this as part of your discipleship, your worship, that this shapes how you come to service on Sundays, whether you're preaching, singing, or sitting in the congregation, whether you're speaking before a Sunday school class, or whatever you might, your responsibilities might include on Sunday or during the week. I love that statement. One's education for ministry is also a form of worship, and it also speaks to the fact that we never stop seeking education in ministry. that it is a lifelong pursuit, and we're really just laying the foundation for what we're going to continue. John, will you bring us home with the last, and we'll finish this up and move on?
The modules that comprise the course of study that may lead a person to candidacy for ordination have been carefully designed to prepare one for the kind of ministry we have described. Their common purpose is to provide a holistic preparation for entrance into the ordained Christian ministry. They reflect the church's wisdom, experience, and responsibility before God. The modules show how highly the Church of the Nazarene regards the gospel, the people of God, the world for which Christ gave his life, and Christian ministry. Completing the modules will normally take 3 or 4 years, but no one should feel pressure to meet this schedule. The careful study for which the modules call should show that before God and his church, one accepts the stewardly responsibility associated with ordained ministry.
Great, thank you. I just feel like the foreword was an important way to frame how we approach this, and is significant for us. So let's move on together. And also, I think there's so much value in reading aloud in front of people and even by ourselves. There's great value in reading aloud significant statements or scripture or story. And that's something that has had a real impact on me and my ministry when I was pastoring full time, entering into the sanctuary each weekday, opening the Bible and reading my devotion out loud. The Bible is meant to be spoken anyway, and we're confessing, we're recognizing a call to be preachers and ministers of the gospel. So cultivating in us that speaking role is significant, important for us, and something I think we're invited to continue to do. So we'll do that probably more often throughout the course of this class, more aloud reading, and perhaps sometimes when you're writing your own papers and you figure out if what you have said makes sense. Even when I am consulting with students at the university here, on the job or so, when they come in to ask me about their history papers or so, one of the things I tell them is read your sentence out loud. Does it make sense to you? If it doesn't make sense to you, it may not make sense to the people you're writing for. And I think it's the same as we learn to communicate with other people through the spoken word, hear ourselves talk and become comfortable with how we do so, with ourselves read. So anyway, I won't belabor that anymore. We'll move on. I want to look at the course vision statement now. Our syllabus begins not with objectives, but with a course vision statement. And I wanted to take a look at that for just a second. If you have your syllabus and pull that up, we're going to move through the syllabus so that we understand what are the expectations and requirements. And I'm going to get that out here and put it in front of me. And that is pages 8 through 14, I believe. So if we have the vision statement, I'm going to read that first paragraph there as well. This course is a basic introduction to the field of Christian education. Christian education has its foundations in 2 primary areas: Christian theology, number 1, and 2, education. Makes sense, doesn't it? Therefore, we will be exploring the theological roots, both in the Bible and history, of Christian education and educational principles and practices that enable our efforts to be effective and relevant. The primary context in which Christian education takes place is the community of faith, which is most often expressed in the local church. So our study will focus primarily on Christian education in the local church the various types of educational settings and structures present there. If you have that, page 8, Diane, can you read the second paragraph of the video?
At the completion of the course, the students and teacher will have a clearer understanding of how Christian faith is nurtured in persons and communities. They will be equipped with some basic skills to create strong educational structures, materials, and practices for use in their own setting. They will also have a growing passion to see children, youth, and adults become Christians and be nurtured in Christian faith.
Thank you. So one of the things that this vision statement does for us is it helps us to ask important and key questions. What am I hoping to see happen here? What are the outcomes that I am anticipating? And this is something that we as pastors want to be thinking about as come to a pulpit. It's something that teachers are asking themselves as they prepare a lesson. It's something as in Christian ministry, we're also in a position of propose who will be doing the teaching. So we have this sort of administrative capacity in many ways for inviting people to begin asking those questions for themselves. What is it that I'm looking to? There are 3 kinds of goals that we talk about, and in your pack, it's resource 1, 2, it is 17, and I just invite you to have 3 kinds of goals that we, the first one having to understanding. We gain a sense of knowledge with this course, with looking at Christian education. We are being shaped by understanding. We are gaining information and knowledge. But this is not all that we are doing. We're also looking to become equipped with skill, do something. We are acting on this knowledge. But that also is not the only thing that we're looking at. We're looking at the attitudes, the values, and commitments that we possess. First source has knowledge, attitudes, values, commitments, and then physical skills or habits. These are in a different order than what I just shared with you. It's also in a different order than the simple saying that our curriculum invites us to think about in doing Christian ministry, Christian education. It is the 3 factors: to be, to know, and to do. To be, to know, and to do. They all inform one another, and they have to do with our character, with our formative education, and with our practical engagement in the ministry. To be, to know, reference. Perhaps you've learned something in the past, and you were forced to learn something in the past, and you ended up hating what you learned. Can you think of a time when you had to learn something and it didn't matter how they taught you to learn it? Maybe we're talking math, maybe we're talking history. I was never a history buff. I never even liked history, and here I am working on my PhD in history. So it's funny where we end up going, but maybe you've been taught something in such a way that you just absolutely despise it. A geometry teacher, and the way she taught was she simply wrote everything on the chalkboard, and we copied down on our paper what she wrote on the chalkboard, all the theorems, all of the proofs. And I was so haphazardly trying to keep up for an entire hour, writing down everything she wrote down, that I never had time to think and process what she was even talking about. And there was no time for her really to give any sort of commentary on the stuff she was putting up there. And I never quite understood it, why she would go to all that trouble to write it on the chalkboard when she could have written it on a paper and passed it out to us, or photographed it, passed it out to us, and then we could have looked at it and then talked about it, because it's not like you can put theorems and proofs in your own words. They have to word for word as they have been constructed. There's no room for subjectivity, and yet there was plenty of room for misunderstanding. And I hated geometry. And it wasn't until the very end of the class when I finally started to understand things after several or grades. And maybe you've had some experiences like that. John, I saw you nod your head a second ago. Teaching high school students, I imagine you've seen this happen, and you may have even have your story or example of an experience like this.
Well, in most of my own classes, most of the time I felt like my teachers were, pretty good. However, as a teacher attending professional workshops and conferences, one of the things that always bugged me was something similar when you had a presenter give a PowerPoint presentation and simply read the PowerPoint to you. You've got it up there. You can read it for yourself, and they offer no comments, nothing else. They just read what's on the screen to you.
Right. Yeah, there can be a redundancy to it that doesn't lead us any deeper into the content, and doesn't invite us to dialogue. So that can definitely be a danger. And methods are important, and that's one of the things we'll move into and think about as we move through the class as well. That methods themselves teach, methods communicate the message sometimes more clearly than the content we're trying to. You've heard the expression, the medium is the message. Marshall McLuhan is writer and kind of sociologist of the 20th century. Called the phrase, mediums what really. So we'll be thinking about that as we think through what it means to me to be, know, and to pretty fast now to educational assumptions in the syllabus. So if you'll return to page 8 in your syllabus. We're not going to read these, but if you'll add the educate that begin with the confession that we invite the Holy Spirit into this educational process, that we request the Holy Spirit to lead us, to guide us, to be with us and among us every day. And particularly, we invite the power of the Spirit that moves and enables our minds to engage with one another, to engage relationally in the synapses of our brain, right? So we want to invite the Holy Spirit. We also want to recognize the importance of community in education and in this process. We do not create community. We recognize that God establishes community. I love a theology of community that is rooted in the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and understand nature relationship. God is by God's very nature relationship oriented and invites us into a fellowship in which God is already enjoying. That's what we do here. We enter into a community that has been initiated by our loving. In Christian education, we understand learning takes place best when we are in community. And so is understood in conversation with others. We talk to one another. That's why we believe in small groups and believe in Sunday school and discipleship. Communities express and share values, and this is significant for us. Think about ways in which community impact and affect how people experience events or opportunities. Think about this question. Diane, this one will resonate with you. In youth ministry, when does the group begin to actually know one another?
Okay, Chet, you went out. I just got in youth ministry and know one another.
Okay. In youth ministry, maybe you're taking a trip, maybe the kids are going somewhere together, and you can tell that, like in the beginning, maybe they're not talking to one another, maybe they're isolated, doing their own thing. At certain turns in the trip, you find that they begin to know one another. What are the indicators that they know one another, and how does that come about?
Okay. They actually start talking to each other, and like they'll bring each other into their group, and that maybe it's like they recognize something that one of the others, like somebody says something and the other one recognizes it, and it's like, oh yeah, that's my favorite song too, or oh yeah, I've done that at school, and they just bring each other in. So having something in common.
Yeah, having things in common. I think the fact that when they take trips together, when they have common experiences, when they begin to tell stories that they share in common. I heard one person say, when the stories we tell are told with the pronoun we, and everybody can kind of share in the story because they have their own experience within it. When we went to Nashville for Momentum, or when we had our lock-in, or when, fill in the blank. So we find that the formative opportunities within community life develop a narrative within the group. That word narrative will continue to arise and come back. So I just kind of want to let that fall in the air a little bit. A community shares life together, and we want to do this in the presence and power of the Holy Spirit. We share life with one another. So the third thing, so we look at, we invite the Holy Spirit, we enter into the community of God with one another, and students are persons with significant knowledge and experience to contribute. This is a third value and educational assumption that we're working with, that none of you are a blank slate. None of you are a blank slate or a blank canvas. You come with experiences already. And what you bring from John's experience in high school, from David and Cody's experience in Houston, you bring, and from Diane's in Oxford, but also in our years of ministry in Kentucky, we bring these things together and we share. My experiences of recent have been on the university campus. I mean, we bring these experiences together, and we will enrich one another's lives as we share, as we work together. I also invite you to welcome the ways each other reflect on your specific context. So we're going to be thinking about our own contexts, but we're also thinking about one another's context. I want to think about, how does someone who's entering into the ministry, who has been a high school teacher and a principal, how do they think about some of these, and particularly what church like? John, what is the Jolton church like?
Uh, we are a small church, about 30 members. It's almost exclusively an adult church with
Okay.
a congregation mostly over the age of 30 or so at least. So very few children or younger people, college age, that kind of thing.
Fascinating. And so, on the other hand, I think Pearson Chapel, it has quite an extensive youth program. Is that correct, David? Can you hear me, David? So a contrast, I don't know if you can hear me or not. I didn't quite catch what he.
I can. We do. We have an extensive youth program.
All right, well, you're good. Don't worry, you're good. All right.
All right, can you hear me now?
I can hear you a little better now.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, describe Pearson Chapel for us, the demographic, and by that I mean, is it largely families with small children, youth, older adults? Describe a little bit about the makeup of the church.
All right. So we range from the ages from 10, 11, from the middle school age, all the way up to elderly.
More than that. Our biggest percentage is in that middle school to mid 40s. So we're real big. That's where we're biggest at. But our we got small kids too, you know. So we go all up to elderly. But really for us, like we're heavy in that working class, you know, that working age to middle school kid. That's where we're the heaviest at.
And the kids, you have a group of, sounds like vets are in the church as well, in the same church, in Pearson Chapel. Do they come with families or are they coming? Yeah.
Most of ours are with their parents. Now, didn't all of them start that way? A lot of our that middle-aged group that came in, we had a big surge in our middle school class about a year and a half ago, just a little while after we got here, and that they started bringing their parents with them. And so that's where we kind of picked up a lot of those. That between that and we have a Celebrate Recovery program where we are focusing on people who just really need the church, you know, drug addiction and things like that. And even though we're way out in the country, we're able to reach people that aren't necessarily out here because they need that program as well. So we hit that age group a lot because of those two factors. The middle school kid. I work at the middle school here in Houston. I'm the in-school suspension director there, and so I work with a lot of troubled kids there as well. So so between that and our Celebrate Recovery program, that's probably why that's the age group that is so dominant here right now.
Okay, that's fascinating. I didn't realize you were working with people. That's interesting. In the community?
Oh, yeah. What is that?
I'm not sure.
I was asking David if he works in the community outside of working with the church. Do you?
Yes, well, not in our community per se. I work in Tupelo at the school district there, but
Okay.
I do actively go out and like go to ball games and things like that, to the students' games or cheerleading competitions, things like that.
I'm thinking job-wise. Are you working for the church alone, or do you have a job outside of that?
Some of your tech guys.
I'm a tech person at a school district in Tupelo.
Gotcha. Okay, that helps me understand. That's fascinating. And Diane's context at Oxford is, of course, she's working with a lot of youth, but it's a fascinating. Do you want to share with them how the youth group has developed, like in terms of, you go ahead, you know what I'm talking about.
Okay. Yes, our youth group, when I started, I actually just had Levi and Leah, and who are Chet's children. And then I started inviting our Hispanic church um, children. So we combined the youth group. Um, that youth group went on for a couple years and became my senior high youth group. Um, and then this fall, I started a middle school youth group in which we combine the Hispanic church and the English church also. And the majority of my middle schoolers are from the Hispanic church. Um, but this just gives me such a blessing to be with those kids and um, learn more about their culture and more about how um, it's different, and they have a different home life than I've had and that my other kids have. And but it's also wonderful to see how these kids come together and they form as one, and it's their youth group, not my youth group, your youth group. It's our youth group.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic in which second generation immigrant families, the children of the second generation within an immigrant family, now connecting is with the in ways that their parents may not have been able to because of a language barrier. And so Diane's providing the space for children of immigrants who don't speak English to be engaged in the life of the church in English, in the ways they are at school, in the ways they are in society, and yet bridges a sense of their parents' faith and cultural solidarity as a community together, and a really important space for the future of these families, the future of the church. So it's good for us to kind of continue to fill in context for one another of where we are. So the fourth thing is, we think about the educational assumptions, is we want to continually think in the context of the local church, which is what we've done and what we've been exploring just now. As come or so far. Okay, one of the things that you will be invited to do, and we'll talk about this more, is you have an I believe statement. And so as you take notes, as you think about taking notes in the class, I invite you to be thinking about what you believe about Christian education, how you articulate your philosophy of Christian education. There are some outcome statements within the syllabus that are on page 9. And I do not want to read all these. I just want to pull the outcome statements. They are CP4, CP5. They go all the way to CX3. And if you'll just take note of that, it may be valuable for you that as you journaling is also something we'll be doing in the class or following each session. If you will move through those outcome statements and perhaps journal a little bit, if one sticks out to you, if something maybe is confusing to you, or you're not sure how that is going to happen, how that outcome is going to happen, journal about it. Journal questions, journal confusions, journal things that are that make an impact on you. So I just want to point to those outcome statements and invite you to give it further thought a little bit later on your own. Move through out that reading that we will do. In my email, I mentioned to it all. I mentioned this to Diane personally, but I didn't send her the email. The book called On the Way by Les Steele is one that I invite you to get your hands on. And it's cheap. You can get it used for $7 with shipping, so it won't be hard to get your time. I want to invite you to wrap. If you've got to order it and it's going to be several days before you get it, I can give you a way of accessing the first couple chapters until you get that. If you go on your browser, if you open up your browser and go to scholar.google.com, scholar, SCHOLAR.google.com. That is just like Google, but it's called Google Scholar. And if you type in the search field, if you type in the name of the author, Les Steele, one S and Les, three E's and Steele. If you type his name in and hit search, the very first link will bring you up a portion of that book. And it's kind of like Google Scholar has, when you go to Amazon, I say look inside, so out there somewhere on the internet, Google Scholar is able to access those portions of the book. They will give you access to a little bit. You can go ahead and begin reading the first couple chapters while you're waiting for your book to arrive if you've ordered it. So that is a good way, and I invite you to do that with other books as well. I've done that with countless books in my graduate studies where I couldn't get my hands on it, but I could read the introduction on Google Scholar. It's a great resource and a great way to get a hold of those things. I'm looking forward to us reading that book together, as I've started on it, and I really appreciate it for the ways that that it is going to lead us to think about Christian education. So that's a significant part of what we're doing. So be mindful of getting your hands on that. There is and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, there is what's it called? I can't think of the word. There's as you read, a study guide. Yeah, there's a study guide that you can answer questions, that helps you think about read. It helps you read more carefully. And so I invite you to begin the study guide as well. The study guide is something that we'll actually be collecting in the end. It's at the end of your student version. And I think a little later I have it written down where you can. So let's look at course requirements quickly. And want to attention to each of these 7 requirements: attendance, attention, and participation. This is incredibly important, especially since focus group, something like Christian education. Here I am talking about the message is as important as the message, the importance of talking about creating a climate and a culture that fosters formative experience, and yet we are separated. We're doing an online class. This is probably the worst class to do online. It's probably not ideal at all, but we really wanted to get this class in and available. And so therefore, attendance, attention, and participation are extremely important. If you can stay engaged when we're together, that'd be awesome. And have your resources accessible, that'll make it better for you and for everybody involved. Incidentally, this is page 9, if you weren't sure, page 9 and 10. Number 2, read Steele book On the Way. Also, however, I invite you to be reflecting through the student version. One thing I will ask you, I would ask you not to read through the instructor's thing. It's okay if you do, it's not a problem. I just, it prohibits you hearing the content more. I don't think it helps us to use the, and I've done classes where students had the student and the instructor thing side by side, and they would follow through. I would not say things like they do. I would invite you, rather than having the student, the instructor guide and underlining or highlighting, I would invite you to have a blank piece of paper and to put in your own words what we are moving through. Because an important educational dynamic that takes place when you hear in let it soak in, and you then begin to write it down as well. There's an important educational thing taking place. So attendance, attention, reading. Number 3, focus groups. We are ourselves a focus group. We're not going to split up anymore, so you don't have to pay much attention to that one. Although we do want to proceed in ways that help us be effective with the formative experience amongst one another. Number 4, sample teaching outline. This is one of the requirements, one of the assignments that you'll have. We'll talk about that more on down the line, but you will be teaching a lesson that you wrote, and your assignment is to present the teaching outline that you will be teaching from. We will all learn from each other about how to prepare a better lesson by hearing one another's struggles, thinking through this together. Number 5, 3 lesson critiques. So begin looking for opportunities where you will observe others in a Christian education setting. It may be a Sunday school, it may be a Bible study. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is. But you are going to want to critique 2 other people or 2 other settings, and you'll critique one in which you are the one who's taught or led. Within those 2 others, so 3 total, one of yourself, 2 of other people, one of those 2 others, I invite and encourage you to examine someone, observe someone outside of your local context. Now, it could be the church, Bible study of some sort at some time for Diane. And David, it could be sitting in at Scott Sam Church or something. Just find an opportunity somewhere outside of your own context that will help broaden your exposure. Okay. The critiques are due on March 23rd. That's a week beyond when hopefully the last class will be. March 23rd. You're welcome to turn it in early, but I want to give extra time for an assignment like that because it seems really extensive. You don't want to start it after the last class. You want to go ahead and get some of those in. And like I said, you'll have more information coming up about that, but be thinking about that and write down that date. Number 6, journaling. If you want to turn to page 13 in your syllabus, 13 and 14 gives you a really good description of the importance of journaling, how this is a tool for personal reflection and integration. This is also an important part of the class. I won't be collecting, but these will be very important for you if you journal to each class. You will journal, and it'll give you the opportunity already thinking about your philosophy of education. You're already wrestling with certain theme, subject content that we're going over. So if you'll begin study as you think about how to do this and what you want to write about it. If that means having a spiral notebook to the side, spend some time at the close of the class or the next morning, spend some time reflecting. And you may open your notes and the notes that you took during class and your student resources and just talk about some of the stuff and look at it. Number 7, the I believe statement. This is kind of this philosophy of Christian education that you are developing. It's not going to be 3 pages, but I would say no less than 2 pages over the class. This is an exercise that will kind of enable me to see what you've processed and some of the conclusions you've come to, ways that you have resolved to think about these things, and what all has informed and shaped your understanding of Christian education and formation in the local church. Will be due the final class March 16. So those are the 7 requirements. If as you continue to go through your syllabus, you see that you have a course outline that kind of gives you a handy, comprehensive look at what we're going to be going over. There's a course schedule. You really have to fill that in. This is not hard and fast. I'm looking at this going 6 weeks. As I said, we're doing lessons. The pace is really going to pick up. We'll be doing as many as 4 lessons the week together. The course evaluation. I want to draw your attention to the fact that resource 1 was page 18 in your packet. That an important part of understanding the process, not only are we talking about, not only are we studying and examining Christian education, you will be performing an evaluation on Christian education. This is all part of the be, know, do concept that we are emphasizing and exploring. The educational process includes an evaluation because it helps us think about what we're doing. And so to participate in an intentional evaluation together will be very formative for us, as well as for looking at this class in the future. I don't know if I'll teach this class in the future, this particular class. Perhaps I will. I know I will be teaching classes in the future. And so this helps me as well as I'm seeking to be a facilitator and instructor of the. So we'll take that seriously, the evaluation. As I think about evaluating you, I'm not looking to how you have what we're talking about. So conversation and dialogue will be significant. But ultimately, paradigm, we're in a room on move through not of power, but a paradigm of service. I'll see that this as an instructor in a position of authority to hammer. The point is to cultivate in us this hunger and thirst and desire for education, to see the value and how it shapes and forms us in our ministry context, and to understand the joy that is present in Christian ministry as we're doing it and as we're bearing witness to ways God is moving and shaping people's lives. So let me wrap this portion up. We're going to take a break in just a second. So thanks for being patient through this kind of lengthy intro that we've taken. Let me give you my phone number. I think I gave you my email. I don't know if my phone number was on there, so you can write it down if you need me. But it is 662-816-0373. Some of you already have it. Feel free to text me or call with any questions. I'm not only available during class time. Feel free to call, discuss, and talk about this stuff through the week. The study guide, yeah, I mentioned the study guide for the reading. It's pages 116 through 136. So I would invite you, there is one more requirement that I would like to have that wasn't in those assignments, or 6, because I think I took one out. And that is that I do want to see your study guide, the study guide that you fill out for reading the book on the way. And you can either fill it out. I'm writing on mine. There's enough room to write. I have to print small, but I can write. You can either photocopy it and send it to me. You can scan it and email it to me. It's 20 pages. So whatever would be easiest for you. And what I would like to do is, once I've received that, I would like to schedule or arrange a one-on-one conversation with each of you about the study guide and about your work on the book, and just talk about the book together. And this will be at the end of the class, when we finish the course, between that March 16, March 23 period. If that doesn't work, it can be after or before, but I would like to have a one-on-one consultation. For Diane, it'd be easy. She and I can meet here locally and have face-to-face. If it works out to have face-to-face with any others, that'd be fine. That'd be great, wonderful. If it doesn't work out, we could do a one-on-one online as well. But I do want to do that in addition to the other assignments. Any questions or comments about the syllabus and course requirements? That was a lot that we just went over. No questions? Okay. So as we close and take a little break, I would like to invite you to be thinking about, if you were to have homework this first time and we were to meet again a week from now, you would have just a little bit of homework this first time. Well, I want to invite you, and I think this is on your first page of your, let me see if I can find it. No, I don't think you have it. So let me tell you what I want to invite you to be thinking about during the break. We're going to take a break. It's 7:20. Let's take a good break, at least 20 minutes, okay? Give you a chance to take a rest, get something to drink, take a break. But then also, if you'll take 5 to 10 minutes, and I want you to think about a couple questions. And when we come back together to start this lesson 2, each of you will be given a few minutes to share your answers, your responses to these questions. The first question is, what are the key influences that helped you come to know Jesus and understand what it means to be a Christian? What are the key influences that helped you come to know Jesus and understand what it means to be a Christian? Another question, if you weren't raised as a Christian, how did you decide to be one? If you were not raised as a Christian, how did you decide to be one? But I would also add, you were raised as a Christian. How did you decide to be one? You may have been brought to church from the moment you could walk or breathe, but there's still a defining moment where you made a decision, you know? So the first question, what are the key influences that helped you come to know Jesus and understand what it means to be a Christian? If you weren't raised as a Christian, or even if you were, how did you decide to be one? Those are questions I invite you to be thinking about. Take 5 to 10 minutes. We will come back together at 7:40. Let's say 7:45. I'm going to add a few minutes to this. 7:45, let's come back. Just to kind of punctuate our close, we began the lesson with reading Genesis and the covenant of God and Abraham, the covenant agreement. In many ways, I talked about this blessing God bestows as the call to trust God, the call to enter into relationship with God, the call to step out, the call to do the work of God. In many ways, the syllabus is a kind of covenant as well. So I invite us to abide by the bonds of the syllabus, okay, and see this as an opportunity for blessing. This is an opportunity to blessing, for blessing. The assignments are an opportunity for blessing. The readings, the requirements, these are all an opportunity for blessing. So let's take a break. I'll see you at 7:45 and have some things jotted down ready to share your response to those questions. Welcome back.
All right.
Everybody on?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to invite you to go around and as and if you'll be ready to go, David and Cody, and just take a few minutes and share in response to those questions that we ended the last session with, and we'll move into our lesson following this little share. And thinking one of the four are we're getting to know one another still. We're processing our own formative experiences. We're also thinking about the formative community through which we have been nurtured in the faith. So go ahead, John.
Well, in thinking about this, you
with us?
I'm sorry. I was raised up in the church. I was in the church from the time I was just a little child, so I've never known really anything outside the church. I would say really the one thing that drew me to being a Christian, to understanding what it means to be a Christian, were the people around me. I saw people in the church, I saw people in my family who were living sincere Christian lives. And so they made it something very real to me. I saw that, we're not just talking about a lifestyle. We're not just talking about a philosophy or an idea or, something like that. But this was an intensely personal relationship. And so I saw that in my parents' life. I saw that in people at my church. I went to a Christian boarding school, and I saw it in a number of the faculty and staff there. So really, I would say that really was the key factor in influencing me to become a Christian and in helping me to understand what it really meant to be a Christian. I have a sister-in-law now, and she wasn't raised up in the church. She didn't have any of those experiences. And to her, I think she doesn't really have an idea of what it means to be a Christian, that there's such a thing as a personal experience of God. To her, being a Christian simply means, well, you go to church and there's some things you do and some things you don't do. But it has nothing to do with really feeling God, experiencing God, anything like that. I don't think she even has the concept of knowing that that's a reality. And so I feel very fortunate that I saw the reality of that from a very early age. So that was probably, I would say, my key influence was the people around me. And I hate to say it, but a lot of the time it wasn't necessarily the preacher. It was other people in the church. So
Sure. Are there key people that you could name and identify what it was about them particularly, like perhaps scenarios or how they conducted themselves?
Well, I would say probably the earliest influence was my mother. She was a stay-at-home mom. There were 5 kids, and she would also often babysit other kids as a way of making money. But I would see her as a kid. I remember every morning after we got up and we had breakfast and we kind of started our day, she went into her bedroom and had devotions. And so, I knew that there was something real going on there, that this wasn't just something she was talking about. This was something she was experiencing. And then later, as part of the Christian high school I went to, we had a principal there, and it was just very obvious that he experienced a deeply personal relationship with God. And he would talk about that, and share that with us. And so I guess, both those two were probably 2 of the key people.
That's good. Thank you, John. Diane, share with us.
Okay, probably the key influence in my life has been my mother, like John. She started going to church when she was pregnant with me, and we started going to the Nazarene church when I was 2 years old because she wanted to learn more, because the church she was attending didn't really teach the Bible. They just they didn't have any Sunday school classes or anything like that that she could learn more about the Bible. So we started going to the Church of the Nazarene when I was 2, and going there at the age of 7 in the primary class, I had a wonderful primary teacher named Miss Millard, who was a wonderful, godly person who loved on us and showed us all what it was like to be a child of God, and taught us. And it was in that class that I became a Christian. She, growing up, I knew Miss Millard until I was about 13, and we moved away from the church. And but she was always so positive, and always such an influence on us. Mom was a prayer warrior, and I saw how she prayed, and how her prayers were answered, especially when my dad was sick. He died when I was 12 with cancer. And there were days we didn't know. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, but there were days that we didn't know where the next meal was coming from or how our bills were going to get paid. And Mom would go in and pray. And I remember one time she was in the room praying. I didn't know what she was doing, but come to find out later, after I got to be an adult, we didn't have any food and we didn't have any money. And I come running in from the mailbox, and one of the old saintly ladies at our church sent us a check. Well, no, actually, it was cash and a card while Mom was praying. And then while we were still opening that card, my older brother, who was a pastor, about an hour and a half away from our house, came with his station wagon filled with food that his church had done a pounding for us. Just ways like that I have seen God work in her life and through her life. And so that's been a major influence on me. Deciding to be a Christian was an easy thing with that kind of example.
Thank you. David.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's on me. Yeah. All right. So I started going to church when I was born. My mom took us to the Nazarene Church in the town of Houston. I probably went till I was about 6 or 7, and then like we fought going to church, so I didn't want to go no more. And when I went to college, I really realized at the Baptist Student Union that what I was really missing out on. I attended one night, and that was the first night that I had experienced of the feeling of the Holy Spirit. We went to they had a worship service, and that was the first night I remember it vividly of me being able to just raise my hands and like experience what the Holy Spirit was what he was doing. And then that I kind of like let that go and really didn't go to church anywhere or do anything. But then my papa had gotten sick with cancer, and it was kind of a funny story. My cousin, who was also a pastor, he was coming to visit him, and instead of my papa being there, it was me there, and so he visited me and witnessed to me, and then right then and there, I accepted the Lord into my life, and so that's who influenced me to become a Christian. Now, Brother Cody here, he's really been the one he's been my mentor, been my guide, showing me what a Christian or how a Christian is supposed to live, what we're supposed to do, what we're called to do. And from that, going back to my papa, I was able to lead him to Christ as well, because he saw the change in me of the way I'm supposed to live. And so he started asking me questions about it, and he ended up getting saved before he passed away. And those are the things that made me a Christian who I am.
Awesome. Awesome. Let me ask, because you talked about the Baptist Student Union, it leads me to believe you were at a state university, or what university were you at?
Well, I wasn't at a university. It was at Itawamba Community College.
Yeah. Okay.
They had the BSU there, and I was able to go. Like a group of friends invited me to go, and I finally broke down. I was like, okay, I'll go with you.
Did you know a professor or a teacher there named, I think it's Marvin Sigler?
I don't think so. I never had him.
Okay. Okay. That's cool. I like that. Thank you for sharing. That's beautiful. Good. Thanks. Cody.
Yeah, I've been raised in church, in the Nazarene church for that matter, my whole life. I'm third generation pastor now, which if you would have told me that when I was growing up, and I actually did have a pastor tell me that. Doug Reed Jr. told me that when I was about 9 or 10 years old. He said, "Boy, you've been called to be a preacher. I don't know if you know it or not." We was at a kids camp and had small groups, and we were all sharing, and there was something that come up, and I just just kind of shared a little bit there. And he said, "Well, you're going to be a preacher one day." And I just looked at him dead in his eyes and said, "You've lost your mind." And I don't think I ever ran away from being a Christian per se, but I really wanted no part of ministry. Just watching Papa and some of the struggles and things like that he went through in ministry, especially ministering in small churches and things like that, and dealing with people. I didn't want a part of that, but he was also my influence, because when I was about 12 years old, he didn't know it, but I was rebelling pretty hard as far as didn't want to go to church. The church we were at the time, Brother Green was my pastor, and man, he loved us and loved the kids and loved the teens, but the body, it's like we were the biggest group there. We had, for our size church, we'd run 50 or 60, and 20 of us was kids, and teenagers, and which was awesome for that little bitty church, and they just couldn't stand it. They thought we were doing too much. I don't know. And I just I started bucking and rebelling. And I told my daddy I'm not going to church no more. And but my papa called him up and was like, "Hey, I want Cody to come stay with me this weekend if you don't care. See if he wants to go to men's prayer breakfast with me," type thing. And long story short, my dad just kind of broke down on him, said, "You don't know it, Daddy, but he's bucking pretty hard. He don't even want nothing to do with church right now."
Wow.
But through all of that, it really, that was kind of a point in my life where God showed me it can't be about where Mom and Daddy wants to go to church or where Papa wants you to go. This is about a relationship between me and you. And my Papa was one that really showed me that, because when, whether it was dealing with people individually or watching him prepare and take care of his own spiritual life, you could tell it wasn't just another day for him. It was time with his creator. It was something special. And every chance he got to tell somebody he loved them, or, I mean, it was just genuine, when he had a chance to witness to someone. And that was the first time I remember thinking that being a Christian is so much more than a label.
Yeah.
It truly is a relationship, and I wanted that. And so that's kind of, he's probably the one that influenced me the most, and helped me kind of get a true understanding what a Christian was. But as far as what made me want to decide to be a Christian, like I said, it was just realizing that I needed that. I couldn't go off of his coattail or anything else. It had to become mine. So.
Right. Good. Thank you. It's fascinating, even as we listen to one another's stories and what we know of one another, as we think about the formative influences. In many ways, there's an aspect and an element of emulation in how we understand ourselves to be faithful? Do you see some of that happening, perhaps, and some of the people you've named and their influence, or what they were doing in the church, or what they were doing in life to in society, in the community, in order to have a positive Christian impact? You can kind of see how that is shaped and informed several of the testimonies, and that's fascinating and beautiful. I will share a little bit as well. I think I had some really key voices in my life, particularly through my youth years. My dad was a minister. I'm a third generation minister as well, in Church of the Nazarene. My grandfather was a pastor, and my father was a pastor. And I think it was in my youth years, there were some really key people in the church, some men, husbands, fathers, who we were able to have a good relationship through teen years. One helping me paint my car and how to do some things, and it just kind of modeling in front of me commitment to the church, being a churchman, being someone who invests in others, and then exposing me do y'all remember Keith? And you know who Keith Green is, the musician of the late 70s? Do you know that name? I remember being introduced to his music, which was just scripture put to song. They were sermons put to song, and just being really gripped by his radical, his message of radical commitment to following Jesus, and just kind of devoured everything he wrote and did and performed in his ministry. So there were key people in the local church. There were people that they introduced me to, and then of course some other authors that I read that had an impact on me. And it was a combination of watching it be modeled for me, whether through my family or through people in the church, but then also being exposed to voices in society, in the world, who had a very kind of evangelistic approach and appeal. Keith Green or other musicians through my high school years that had a big impact on me. And I would get their albums and I would sit there and listen to them and read through the lyrics and pray. And it was just really formative for me. That, and then teen quizzing was a big deal for me. I teen quizzed in Kentucky, where Diane was at one time for many years, and that made a big impact on me. I had a bedroom in the basement, and I took my little Bible portion, Romans and James, and I took my little Bible portion in the basement, and I would just pace and memorize, and I would go to my job at Kmart, and I would round up the carts at night. And in between bringing in these big long lines of 10, 12 carts, I'd pull out my portion as I'm walking back out to fetch more carts, and I would read through, and then I'd put it in my pocket and push carts, and I'd recite them as I'm going about my job. So it was a Bible quizzing, things that in the life of the church bear an impact and influence on our development. Those also had a real impact on me. So thank you for sharing. Again, I think we see glimpses of a variety of kinds of education happening. And we're going to look at some of those kinds of education, the settings of Christian education, the different contexts of Christian education, the levels of Christian education. And that's what we're going to look at now. We're going to work as we begin this next lesson, we're going to work with two definitions of Christian education. And one of the things that we want to recognize is the importance of integrating two key themes as we talk about Christian education. Christian education integrates what it means to be Christian with what it means to do education. Obviously, that's one of those things you say, thanks, Captain Obvious. Christian education means integrating Christianity and education. It takes its ideas from two different areas, theology and education. If Christian education is to be good, therefore, it must first of all be Christian, and second of all, it must be good education. And I think it's very important for us at the outset to recognize that those two areas are not distinctively different, and they are also not at odds, Christianity and education. We believe that they are very well knit together in the mind of God. Christian education. Education is at the heart of Jesus' own ministry. I mean, you think about it. Who did he call? He called disciples. The Greek word mathetes. To be a disciple was to be a student. They were his students. They often called him teacher, in addition to Lord or Master at times, or the Christ. When they got it right, they called him their teacher. They were his students. And so education is at the heart of Jesus' own ministry. And we see the importance of the kinds of levels of education at play in what Jesus was teaching the disciples. Very formative setting. So as we think about a couple of definitions for Christian education, here is a first definition, and I'll invite you to write this one down. Definition 1 of Christian education: it is the ministry of bringing people to maturity in Jesus Christ. Definition 1, Christian education is the ministry of bringing people to maturity in Jesus Christ. So here's a question. This is a very simple statement, but we're talking about bringing people to maturity. Let's ask and think about together and talk through, how can you tell when a person is mature in Christ? How can you tell when a person is mature in Christ? Any ideas on that question? How can we tell when a person is mature in Christ? What do you think?
Hey, I hate to kind of change subject. I just took a phone call a few minutes, just a second ago, and it kind of threw us off when I did it. But I've got a young lady in the church. In our youth. She's how old?
She's 16.
She's 16 years old. Just found out she's pregnant, and grandma's got in her head she's taking her to Jackson tomorrow to end this, and it's just weighing pretty heavy on me
And
Okay.
me.
and my youth pastor here, and
Right.
But if y'all don't mind, I'd like to take a minute and just pray, because right now our one of my teen Sunday school teachers is making a phone call, just trying to reach out, and
Okay.
I'd like to pray over that situation.
Let's do it. Why don't you lead us in prayer over this, Cody?
Father, Lord, we just come to you right now, and Lord, you know the whole situation, the ins and the outs. Lord, you know this life that's their life that you created. Lord, that you spoke into existence. And Lord, it's not your will that this life be terminated. We know that. Lord, my prayer right now is that you way out. We'll say she sees a different light in that. May she see the hope and the promise that this child brings, Lord, because it's as much as it maybe was not planned, it's God, it's still life, created in your image, created to do a work for you one day. And Lord, may that work that it was created to do, may it start right now and softening this grandmother's heart to see just how precious life is and just how much, Lord, you love it. Lord, be with this lady as she's talking to him right now. Lord, this conversation is going on right at this very moment. And Lord, I pray you give her the words. And Lord, just have your way. Be in this situation, Lord. Touch it. Precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. And wow. We'll continue to pray for that situation. We'll keep that on our mind throughout this evening and over the week, and pray for you as pastor and youth pastor to speak words into people's lives. This, no doubt, moving forward will be a formative process. And we'll be praying for you as you seek to provide and foster and nurture a Christ-honoring, not just outcome, but a Christ-honoring presence for all those involved, granddaughter, grandmother, mother, father. I mean, there's so many people involved in this. So we'll be praying for you, because you'll be speaking into a lot of lives. And we'll continue to pray for them as well. Thank you. So the question we were thinking about when we paused was, how can we tell when a person is mature in Christ? We're working with that definition. Christian education is the ministry of bringing people to maturity in Jesus Christ. How can we tell when a person is mature in Christ? Or maybe I should say, maybe a better question is, when a person is maturing in Christ, how can we tell?
I would say one thing would be that they show evidence that being a Christian is integrated into all parts of their life. In other words, they don't just have a compartment that's church and Christian related, and then the other areas of their life are totally separate. They have work lives and school lives and family lives or whatever, but there's evidence that all of that is being integrated in their Christian experience.
Right. That's a good point. Good. Anyone else? How would you answer that? How can you tell when you see maturation happening? Or
the youth focused over here, I look at a lot of whenever on Wednesday nights, that's our biggest youth time, and them maturing as far as going to the altar, but also going to the altar with each other.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I watch them all just surround each other and praying for one another. And then another thing I've also noticed, I have one girl in our youth group that she started a Bible study and with her friends at school. So that's like, it shows me that she's maturing and continuing on and being a Christian.
Yeah, like she's even developing leadership qualities within her faith and obedience.
Right.
That's pretty cool. Or what you said about those going to the altar together, that it fosters in them a coming alongside others in the walk. And that to me, that is so significant. Part of maturing in our walk is when we open ourselves to consider where someone else is in theirs.
Right.
Good. Any other thoughts on that? Maturing, the signs of maturity or maturing in Christ?
Another thing I think of is how they respond to tragedies or unexpected events, hardship, those kind of things. You know, you read about these things that happen to other people, and I have to look at my own life and think, man, you know, how would I handle that? Would I be mature enough in my faith to handle something like that?
Right, right. That's a good point. That's a good point. How they talk about it, how they bear witness to God at work in their life in the midst of trial or struggles or challenges. Good point. Good. So maturity, of course, is multifaceted. When we talk about spiritual maturity, we know that it is not simply something that we're not talking about just knowledge, that they know a lot about the Bible. We're talking about ways that it shapes how they conduct themselves, how we conduct ourselves. It is um, about an engagement with the Bible and formal education, but it's even about more than our knowledge. It's even about more than our actions. We can teach someone to act like a Christian. We can teach someone to behave in a particular way, but it doesn't necessarily make them a disciple of Jesus, does it? We have to put all the factors together in returning to that threefold: to be, to know, and to do. We also sense this passion, this solidarity for others, that when they love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, they are also drawn to love others as well. We see this kind of whole package in the maturation process, and there is no end to the growth process. Some of the things that we're talking about are things that we're seeing in youth, but if we were to describe an elderly person doing some of these same things, it would also bear witness for us of the fact that God is deeply involved in their life. Someone who's 85 years old and comes alongside someone else at the altar is also a sign of maturity, in addition to two, 13 or 14-year-olds going to the altar together. There's something significant about that. And so we want to identify that there is no end to the growth process. This class is called Providing Christian Education for All Ages. And so we understand that helping people mature in Christ is something that never ends, that it is the goal itself, is the continual maturation process. No one has arrived. No one is finished. No one is complete or done. So this brings me to definition number 2. This one's a little bit long. Definition number 2, Christian education is one of the essential ministries of the church by which we prepare people to receive the gospel. It continues, but I'm going to go back so I don't leave you behind. Christian education is one of the essential ministries of the church by which we prepare people to receive the gospel in conversion and total consecration. Prepare people to receive the gospel in conversion and total consecration. Next sentence, we also want to inspire and lead them to experience growth. We also want to inspire and lead them to experience growth. Finally, we want to prepare them for effective service to the church and to the world. Finally, we want to prepare them for effective service to the church and to the world. I'll read through the whole thing one more time to see if you've got it all, and we'll break it down a little bit. Christian education is one of the essential ministries of the church by which we prepare people to receive the gospel in conversion and total consecration, or you might call all of that evangelism. We also want to inspire and lead them to experience growth. We might identify that is a discipling or discipleship process. And finally, we want to prepare them for effective service to the church and to the world. And this is ministry or service. So on page 20, resource 2.1, you have a page that looks like this. I don't know if you can see it okay. And it shows this kind of circular definition of Christian education: evangelism, discipleship, equipping for ministry. And it's like a cycle of Christian education. We have already talked about kind of a cycle of Christian education, that as we talked about people who had an impact on our lives and the things that they did and the things they cared about, we've already recognized a cycle, because some of the things we saw them do are things that now we find meaningful to do ourselves in the church. We've already kind of borne witness to the fact that we've been products of Christian education, and now we seek to be formative agents of Christian education, even as we're being still continually formed. And so that little illustration and diagram shows that circular nature, that continuity of Christian education. Christian education is one of the essential ministries of the church. You cannot have the church without having people grow through Christian education. Otherwise, the church is always only one generation old. You know, a church that is only full of Christian elementary Christians, or as Paul said, baby Christians, you know. So as we think about this, we think about that circle again: evangelism, discipleship, and equipping for ministry. The circle keeps going and it repeats itself. Think about where you were 4 or 5 years ago and how much growth has taken place in your life. How has that happened for you? Well, probably because someone spoke key words to you. Maybe someone's introduced you to Christ, help you to make a total consecration to Christ, encourage you to grow, equip you to serve. And so I'm reaching back more than just 4 or 5 years ago. I know for some I'm talking several decades here, but this is the process that continues to work in us and to work in the church. And so let's think about the purpose of the church. The church is to declare the gospel to the world so that people receive it and become Christians, to bear witness to the kingdom of heaven, to bear witness to the work of God in the world that is redeeming, this God who is redeeming the world through his son, Jesus Christ. The church is a community where we grow in our faith. We understand what it means to be Christian and where our hearts are pulled toward God so that we love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. So here's some questions that I invite you to have mulling over in the back of your head. How do we learn to be Christian? How do we learn to be Christian? And we may feel like we have already answered this, but let me ask some other kind of some questions that kind of contest how we have come to understand this. What if I said, how did you learn to be American? How would you answer that? How did you learn to be American? Go ahead and offer up some answers. How did you learn to be American?
Well, there was some formal training. I've had civics classes, things like that.
Right. Perhaps through social studies, learning about American history. Go ahead, Cody. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, just living here. I mean, you know, going through life every day, and it's kind of like, you know, as much as we're all American, we still all American. Our cultures may be a little different. You're in a university type town; it's a little bit different, but it doesn't take away from who we are as Americans. So, how do I learn to be an American? Just growing up and right here in the United States, and just seeing it, you know, firsthand. It's kind of like how do you learn how to be a Christian? Well, you got to live it. If you don't live it, you never truly learn how to be one. You just you can try to tell somebody what it's like, but you don't know it unless you live it.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to answer, how did you learn to talk with a Southern accent?
I got a Southern accent? No way.
How did you learn to become a Mississippi State Bulldog fan?
God's given grace right
No,
there.
no.
Oh, yeah.
So the question is legitimate. I mean, like John brought up a good point. There's some things we learn in school about what it means to be American, perhaps, but a lot of it is so there's an element of formal education, but a lot of it also is being familiar with laws, or how people conduct themselves, the cultural ways and means that we navigate society. So what I'm asking essentially, by making this comparison, when we ask how we learn to be Christian, we're asking a cultural question. We're asking a cultural question. How do we learn to be Christian? It has to do with where and how we live our lives, doesn't it? And it varies from formal learning to informal learning. It includes both of these. All of these areas are important to Christian education. So on page 21 in the student guide, resource 2.2 shows 3 contexts of Christian education: formal education, informal education, and formation. Formal education is what we are doing here. It is like classroom setting. It is school, it is lessons, it is curriculum. Maybe we have a teacher and a material or a book and a text, and things are written down. We learn some things this way. You learned something about what it means to be American this way. I mean, that's part of formal education. A civics class, a social studies class, perhaps US history. That's formal education. Informal education is not always, it's not done in the classroom, but it is still intentional. It's just not in a formal setting. So maybe you have a skill. Maybe you learned how to drive from a family member. You didn't go to a class. Perhaps you didn't learn to drive through a driver's ed. You learned to drive from a family member. My son learned to drive a stick shift from his grandfather in a field in a pickup truck, over a cow pasture. Maybe play a sport. And that's also an example. Backyard basketball is an example of informal learning, whereas a coach teaching you in the gym would be an example of formal learning. So we definitely also see ways in which informal education plays its role in our formative makeup in the church. We named these people, watching people pray, watching the way people conduct themselves, among others in the church. Then there's 3, formation. Formation is what happens as we live life together. It kind of takes place naturally. It's like picking up a Southern accent, it is taking on the accent, the dialect of Christian living, to use the metaphor. Your parents maybe didn't teach you formally to be an American, but as you lived life in America, you take on some of those things. It's a cultural impartation. In Christian education, we're looking at ways that all 3 of these contexts inform what it means to be Christian. We are becoming Christian together. This is the power of the church and the importance of a community that shapes us. There is power in what we are doing, our words, our values, and our actions. And we are being shaped in terms of what it means to be Christian. And sometimes we don't think about it because it's not necessarily formal, but it is happening. And as Christian educators, as ministers of Christian education in the context of the community, one of the things that's important for us is to recognize the environment and climate in which we are preparing space for people to be shaped. And we are shaping them constantly by the space we've created, by the words we speak, by the ways we interact with others in front of them and with them directly, by how we conduct this Christian community. So here's a little story. So let me finish that and I'll tell my story. Every time the church gathers, we are becoming more and more this Christian community, which is why, or we are becoming more and more the community that we are becoming, which is why we want to be so intentional about keeping the image of Christ, the message of Christ, the purpose of Christ at the center of all we are and do, that it shapes how we do community. And this is the formative impact. So when my daughter Leah was little, she's at Trevecca now, so I'm talking 17, 18 years ago, when she was just a toddler. I remember that we had gotten her, or somebody had gotten her, these little glow-in-the-dark stars and planets that we were going to put up on her ceiling in her bedroom, so that when she went to bed at night, she would have these glow-in-the-dark constellation on her ceiling. And we had them in a packet. And for a long time, I hadn't put them up on the ceiling or the wall. They were just sitting on her dresser. And Dad's, you or Diana, Mom, you know what it's like. You've got something for your kids. You're not real anxious to do it, so you set it aside and it sits there a while. So if this was my packet of stars, this kind of flat thing, and they were just laid in there and they had stars and planets, I just laid it on her dresser. Well, lo and behold, I also laid a book on top of it. So part of it was covered by a book. And I remember one night we turned out the light after we said goodnight, and I looked at the stars, and they were sitting on the dresser, and they were already shining. They were still in their packet. They still had the cellophane over it, but they were shining. They weren't even on the ceiling, but they were shining. And I moved the book and picked it up to look at it. And the part that had a book over it, they were all still dark. And so here I had a packet, and half of the stars were shining, and half of the stars were not glowing at all because they'd not been exposed to the light. This is something like what we're thinking about when we think of being present in the church. We are there to reflect the light to which we've been exposed in the presence of Holy Spirit community. The stars that had the book over them, those had distance from the light. They weren't even able to reflect it. But there is something that happens in the context of the community of faith that's bearing witness to the light of God in the face of Jesus Christ. We begin to shed and shine that light as well. As one of the church fathers said, it's like a rock in the sun. The rock becomes warm because it sits in the sun, not because it somehow generates heat, but because it sits in the presence. Well, there's a formative aspect to Christian education. We're creating the context in which the light and the warmth of God can saturate a person's life. This is the formative impact that we have and are able to provide people as they grow in the knowledge of God and Christ. Now, that's not to say I don't want to downplay their own participation, but I am providing the foundation for what we think about as leaders and those who see to the formative framework in which people are seeking to be disciples. So if you can turn again to resource 2, and that's the one I'm still holding. I was using as my star illustration. I want to think about the different contexts of Christian education that we expressed as we were thinking about our own lives. We were thinking about people. We were thinking about experiences, encounters, things we witnessed, and the ways that they had an impact on us. And if we take that resource 2.2, the three contexts of Christian education, we could probably begin to fill in where those different people, events, scenarios, where they fit in our own Christian education. How would we fill in these circles? So as I think about formal education, what would you say back to me? For me, one of those was Sunday school, of course. One of those that I named in my own sharing was quizzing. That's formal education. How about others? As you reflect on your story. Go ahead, John.
Well, I attended Christian schools from grade 7 through 12. So there were a lot of Bible classes, chapel sessions, those kind of things.
Right, right. Good. Anyone else? Formal education.
Well, Trevecca.
Okay, yeah, right.
A student at Trevecca. It's definitely formal.
Absolutely. Especially with chapel being part of that educational experience. Bib faith classes. Good. How about informal? Let's talk about that a little bit. The informal context of Christian education. And you can draw from your own story that you already shared and just throw out those illustrations.
Yeah, with the informal, I think it's kind of like where I was talking about, just living every day, or going every day with my grandpa, would be visiting or whatever he was doing, kind of watching his movements of the day.
I agree. When you observe how someone else is living their Christian maturity, Diane talked about seeing her mother pray. These are examples of informal Christian education, but which are imperative to our formative experiences as we develop. Anyone else? Informal education.
Would concerts like Winter Jam, would that be considered informal?
That's a good question. I don't know. It kind of moves back and forth between informal and formal, doesn't it? And one of the reasons I say that is because there's a very formal, intentional, I don't want to say curriculum, but there's a goal. There's a message that has been designed, that has been carefully crafted by the creators of Winter Jam. On the other hand, you're rallying all the teens to get on this bus. You're going to eat at McDonald's and you're eating fries at midnight. You are sitting with them in line at Winter Jam and freezing until they open the doors and let you in. But you're having conversations and you're interacting and you're joking, but you are providing a healthy context for them to flourish socially in their youth years, and that those are these informal opportunities that, as a youth pastor, that those informal moments are teaching them as much as giving a Bible study, and recognizing that is so significant. So I like the idea of Winter Jam because it kind of includes both those, doesn't it? That's good. Anything else on informal?
At the high school I went to, the young people were responsible for conducting the Sunday morning service. Okay. And so it was kind of a club that you belonged to, and they would have a faculty member who kind of coached you in, preparing a devotional or an object lesson or leading the singing or, something like that. But there was no kind of curriculum or, formal presentations or anything.
Okay. And so a lot of what they did, I imagine, was by observing and watching what other people had done.
Right.
Okay. And that's kind of if you could use the metaphor, Dallas Willard is a Christian writer who talks about discipleship in terms of apprenticeship. To me, that sounds a lot like that. You learn a trade, you learn a skill, you cultivate an ability by apprenticing with a mentor, with someone who knows how to do this. And so that, to me, illustrates that sort of kind of informal, kind of formal, informal context. How about formation? How about formation? In this context of Christian education, what are some of the ways that our stories reflected this ring in the circle?
Would that be like personal experience, like testimony type thing? Like what? I'm just kind of trying to see where that's coming from. Because like the foundation, as far as me preaching, I mean, you know, it started with teaching a Sunday school class way back when I was still a teenager, but kind of filling in some in our teen class here and there, and then began teaching youth, and then realizing that it was a call there. So I was just kind of, I don't know exactly what you're looking for with that.
No, I think you're right. I think hearing testimonies, hearing being around, watching the way people interact with one another, and just being in the midst of that community, it's a formative experience. Vocabulary that's used, it's a formative experience. Anything else on that before we move on? We're going to talk a little bit more about formation and spend some more time there. So let's do that. Let's move on a little bit. And if you have the very next page, pages 22 and 23, I invite you to get page 22 out as we think about formation. I've got a definition of formation here, and you've got it printed out there. It is the intentional process of nurture for children within a Christian faith community and of assimilation of adults who are entering the Christian faith community for the first time. So as we think about formation, we're talking about, number one, for both, it's the intentional process, one, of nurture for children within a Christian faith community, two, of assimilation of adults who are entering the Christian faith community for the first time. And on the next page, we're going to look at 8 ways formation happens. These are key, and we don't always, not all traditions use all of these, and we see them used more in some traditions than others. So number one, community rites or traditions, that our rituals shape us. And we might say, well, we're Protestants, we're Protestant evangelicals, we don't use rituals. Well, yeah, we do. We just don't call them that, you know. I mean, for one thing, baptism is a rite. That is a rite of passage. That is a initiatory rite into the community of faith. It is a rite. We do have rituals. We have rituals in our families with how we celebrate Christmas. We put up a Christmas tree. That's a ritual. We have pizza on Christmas Eve. You know, there are a variety of things that we do. Maybe it's what you do on vacation. Maybe it's things that you do to make memories as a family. We do have rituals within our local context. We may not always call them that. We may be so accustomed to them that we don't recognize their formative value, but we do have rituals. And to be able to recognize that is important for us because it gives us the license to analyze it, to assess it, to consider, is this continuing to be a positive Christian formative experience for people, or are we just doing it because we always have, because it's a community habit, because it is just something we've always done, and I guess we always will, you know? So we have not just the permission. In Christian education, we have the authority, we have the imperative to question our own rituals. So what might those be specific to your church family? What are some of those traditions that you have? And would a newcomer, what do those traditions, those rituals, what do they communicate them to about your community's faith? Would they find meaning in the tradition? Are there some traditions that your churches have that you'd be willing to share? Anybody want to share traditions or rituals?
Well, we have a tradition, I guess, or a ritual of sharing the grace and peace, as we call it.
Yeah.
As part of the service, welcoming everyone, and I mean, it just kind of becomes a free for all with people intermixing and welcoming, and then for about 10 minutes or so.
Yeah. That's a tradition. That's a ritual, and different contexts do that differently. For some people, you turn around and shake one hand. For others, you walk across the sanctuary and talk to a lot of people, and sometimes if it's a small context, you can shake every hand in the sanctuary before you go back to your seat. For others, they want you to offer the peace of Christ to the person next to you and sit down, so it's different for different communities. Anybody else? Maybe you some churches sing the doxology, praise God to whom all blessings flow, after they give the offering. Some people get up and walk to the offering rather than having the offering come to them. All sorts of different traditions. Are there any others that you'd like to name?
In my former church, when people joined the church, we always sang "Blessed be the tie that binds," and went around and shook their hands and hugged them and welcomed them.
That's cool. I remember as a kid, some of our churches, we did that. We sang, "I'm so glad I'm part of the family of God," but we would shake, everybody in the church would come by and shake the new members' hands. And as a kid, I thought that was so fun. It's interesting how we develop these meaningful rituals. Baptism, as I said, is actually a rite. It is a ritual within the church. It is a sacrament. It is a means of grace. And it is a rite. I don't mean rite as in R-I-G-H-T. I mean rite as in R-I-T-E. So we ask ourselves, why do we do these things? And I think it's always a good thing to do is ask ourselves why we do what we do in the church. They often remind us of the impact of our formative experience. When we see someone else baptized, we think of when we were baptized. When we go to a wedding, we see someone get married, perhaps we think about our own marriage. So these rituals shape us. So let me move on. 8 ways formation happens. 1, community rites or traditions. 2, environment. Our environment shapes us. There might be an emotional climate to the place. Sometimes we can go into a place and it might even feel cold somehow, and not warm. And you go somewhere else and you feel very at home. It's very welcoming, and we tend to respond differently in different contexts. The space might create this sort of environment that welcomes us. If we were in a room together, we'd be sitting around a table. I would be sitting next to you. I wouldn't be standing in front of you. We would be doing this like a table dialogue. I wish we were. And that would be arranged intentionally, that we are learning together as we move through this. In our worship spaces, the way we arrange how we worship communicates something about what we believe about God and what we believe about the faith, how we arrange it. You know, in Catholic churches, the Mass is the center point of the service. The elements, the bread and the body, are the center point of the service, and so the central feature, the furniture itself, is different than in our Church of the Nazarenes. So you have the communion table, which is high, lifted up, and above and center. Well, in ours, the preaching moment has become that centerpiece of breaking open for us the gospel of Christ. And so typically we have a communion table, and then we have a pulpit behind it. And that's just kind of our tradition. That's what we have adopted as the way that we arrange our room for communicating the value we find in the gospel. All of these things are formative for us. Having altars in front are formative for us. The third thing, time. The way we keep time shapes us. We worship on Sunday, not because we're confused about which day is the Sabbath. We worship on Sunday because Jesus was raised on the first day of the week. Early Christians who were Jews would observe the Sabbath in keeping with their tradition, but then they would celebrate the resurrection on Sunday, the first day, in keeping with the day Jesus was raised from the dead. The way we keep Christian calendar, you know, we observe a calendar that moves through the year in a way that tells the gospel story. So we observe Advent, we observe Christmas, we observe this road and journey to the cross that Jesus traveled in the season of Lent that leads up to Holy Week. During Holy Week, we observe key moments in Jesus' last days, like washing the disciples' feet, or being with them for a Last Supper and praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and having a Good Friday service, and then having a resurrection celebration. After Easter, we have these days leading up to Pentecost, in which we celebrate the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. We have these in succession, the way they appear in the gospel, and we move through the Christian year in a way that keeps us immersed in the life of the gospel, the life of Jesus in the gospel. It's a significant way to keep time and the Christian calendar in the church. And we can arrange our messages, our sermons around this, and we can arrange the life of the church around this. It becomes part of the fabric of the life of church members. Number 4, community life. What we do or don't do together for enjoyment shapes us, whether it's playing volleyball on Wednesday nights after church or having suppers. This is all part of the community life. Number 5, discipline. Different churches emphasize how they keep discipline in different ways, how they emphasize deeds or emphasize a life of prayer together. They may do this differently in different contexts. So discipline is a way of formation happens. Number 6, social interaction. That patterns for interacting socially communicate and shape us. Just this week, Diane and I were talking about church architecture with another pastor who is about to go to a church that has a foyer, he said, that was, only big enough to walk through. Nobody stands in the foyer and talks. They go into the sanctuary, and it's because it was built 100 years ago or more. But churches today, when they're built, they tend to build larger foyers. The Oxford Church has that's one of the best features of the church, is it has this big foyer where people could socialize before and after worship service. And I think that's so important. and significant for the life of the church, social interaction and the way we pattern that. Number 7, role models. We talked about that. We recognize who the heroes are in the church. Good pastors find ways to name local spiritual heroes who we honor in our church. Number 8, language, the vocabulary that we use in the church and in the community of faith. There might even be words as we've moved through these first 2 lessons that you already would say, that word keeps coming back up, or this phrase keeps coming back up, and it begins to communicate what perhaps I value and our curriculum on Christian education values, certain phrases or words. So to summarize, and we're bumping up against the end of our time together, we want to be a Christian. We want to be Christian. We want to learn and to grow in our knowledge, and we want to act out. It's all part of this be, know, and do. We need the formal instruction of Sunday school and Bible study. We need the education, but we also need the formative experiences within the social life, the formative experiences within the worship service. These all come together in the life of the community of faith. And so we enter a sanctuary together and worship, but we also sit down at a table together and eat together. We do other events, doing ministry in the community, perhaps fixing someone's house or taking kids to significant events. So hopefully it has become clear that when we say Christian, too, we're not talking about some static identity. We're talking about a dynamic path of discipleship. And as pastors and leaders in the church, we share capacity for shaping these educational formative experiences. As we close, think through all the different things that we have explored for defining Christian education. We've even looked at 2 different definitions for Christian education. You may consider which one of those appeals to you more. The next time we meet, one of the things that they recommend for us to do is to share a Seder meal, S-E-D-E-R, like a Passover meal, Jewish Passover meal. I so wish that we could do that together. And that's one of the downsides of us doing online. Again, formative experience in a class on Christian education online is not ideal. I'm going to think through perhaps how we might engage with the idea of a Seder meal without actually being able to partake in it together. I really wish we could, but we'll be moving into the Old Testament next week, the New Testament next week, and hopefully even begin looking at some of the developmental theories that we have down the road for us. Thank you for hanging in there. This went the full 3 hours. We did have a long break, but this was a long one. We're going to have to move fast to get all this in. So I do welcome you to begin working on the book On the Way by Les Steele. Again, if it doesn't come in time, start reading it on Google Scholar. Start filling out your study guide at the end of your student edition. And don't forget to journal. And as we go, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other assignments. Don't worry about that too much now, unless you want to be thinking about analyzing or critiquing a Christian education context. But I would say just hold off on that for a little bit. Give your focus at this point to reading the book and journaling. But thank you all. Any closing comments as we wrap things up? Okay, we will continue to pray for David and Cody and this young girl, and for her family and for this young life. So thank you all for sharing that. As Christian educators, we're working with people from infancy through adulthood, and how interesting the stages of life that you named even in that story. So God bless you all as you continue to be formative influences in your communities of faith. Thank you all. Have a great night. I'll see you in a week.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Blessings.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.